50,000 occupiers at the border, and Russia is preparing a massive strike against Ukraine. A fiasco for Russian paratroopers and Marines. Not a single success in 2 months. The enemy is preparing the largest offensive in the past year. Where will the Russians strike? I'll share all the details in just a moment. Welcome to Ukraine Today. I'm Victoria Panchenko, and here are the latest events. The Russian army is preparing for an offensive in the Zaporizhzhia direction. The occupiers are redeploying some of their troops from the Sumy region there as they realize that previous attempts to break through in this direction have been unsuccessful. This was reported on August 18 by the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, General Alexander Syrsky, in an interview with RBC Ukraine.
Right now, the enemy is regrouping and focusing on two main directions. These are the Pokrovsk direction, which for the Russians remains decisive. And now the enemy is redeploying its units from the Sumy to the Zaporizhzhia direction. That is, this will be the second direction where the enemy plans to launch active offensive operations.
According to him, low-intensity actions are ongoing in the Zaporizhzhia direction.
However, following Putin's objectives and directives, the occupiers are also trying to deliver a powerful strike there. This was planned as far back as a year ago. You remember, don't you, that the Kursk operation actually disrupted their plans?
Syrsky reported that in the Sumy region, the enemy suffered defeat and has not had any success over the past 2 months, despite the fact that a powerful group was concentrated there, consisting of the best Russian units, paratroopers, Marines, and the top motorized rifle units of the ground forces. Since the beginning of the year, the occupiers' losses in manpower have amounted to 276,300 personnel. The Commander-in-Chief also reported that during this time, the defense forces destroyed 1,132 tanks and 3,087 armored combat vehicles of the enemy. Moreover, in 1,010 days of war, Russia has occupied less than 1% of Ukraine. The armed forces of Ukraine leave the enemy no chance. More details are coming up in the report.
The long-awaited offensive by the armed forces of Ukraine has begun. Our defenders have launched an offensive in the Sumy region. The advance of Ukrainian troops is being recorded in the Zaporizhzhia direction. The defense forces have recaptured at least 2.5 kilometers of territory from the occupiers, according to the General Staff of Ukraine. Thus, the armed forces of Ukraine managed to establish full fire control over the enemy's logistical routes. Thanks to this, the supply lines have been disrupted. The delivery of ammunition, the evacuation of Russian troops, as well as the reinforcement of Russian forces by bringing in reserves. As a result, active combat is currently taking place in the areas of the villages of Oleksivka and Yunakivka, where the enemy, albeit slowly, is retreating. In the northern Zaporizhzhia direction, Ukrainian soldiers continue active operations aimed at destroying the enemy and liberating our settlements. Active operations are taking place in Oleksivka and Yunakivka in the Sumy region. The fight continues. Glory to Ukraine! However, the occupiers are not giving up hope of breaking through the Ukrainian defenses somewhere. For the first time in a long while, the Russians launched a tank assault on Kupiansk. But the operation failed. The armed forces of Ukraine delivered a tough response. And even though the occupiers threw their tanks, armored fighting vehicles, and infantry into the battle, it was all in vain. The enemy was spotted on the left bank of the Oskil River, particularly in the direction of Lyman-Pershi-Kupiansk. There, the enemy tried to break through the Ukrainian defenses using 2 tanks and 3 armored fighting vehicles. However, the armed forces of Ukraine put up a worthy resistance, damaging and destroying the equipment.
In addition to the substantial loss of military equipment and resources, nearly all of the available Russian manpower, including both regular army personnel and mobilized reservists, has been committed to the ongoing conflict, significantly impacting their operational capabilities and long-term strategic outlook.
Meanwhile, Ukrainian tanks are striking the occupiers without missing. In one of the settlements in Donetsk region, where the 3rd Army Corps is holding the line, our tank broke through the enemy's defenses almost effortlessly. Enemy! Despite being hit by an FPV drone on its armor, the Ukrainian equipment quickly takes position and opens fire on the enemy at close range. As a result, the crew manages to complete the mission and quickly return to their position without any losses. And here is the work of the UAV operators from the 4-Post Brigade. Their drones precisely struck the equipment and manpower of the occupiers in the Vovchansk direction. After the strikes, the enemy suffered losses and was forced to flee their positions. Even well-fortified enemy positions do not save the Russian army from Ukrainian drones. Yes, aerial reconnaissance pilots detected the movement of an enemy tank and pinpointed its shelter. In 2 strikes, the enemy vehicle was destroyed. The first drone tore off the camouflage net and the second struck the enemy IFV directly. The occupiers simply had no chance to escape. Our defenders also dominate the skies. Over the past day, the armed forces of Ukraine managed to bring down at least 4 enemy strike and reconnaissance UAVs. As a result, against the backdrop of real failures at the front, the occupiers have resorted to their favorite Kremlin tactic of fake victories. Russian army soldiers are filming staged videos, capturing settlements. Indeed, Russian propaganda is actively employing a new tactic of spreading disinformation. Staged victories to create the illusion of success at the front. To do this, the enemy sends small groups with Russian flags bypassing the positions of Ukrainian defenders. Some of them manage to infiltrate certain settlements and film short videos that supposedly confirm the capture of new territories. Such videos are used for triumphant reports to the Kremlin leadership and are spread in the media to put pressure on Ukrainian society. But incidents like these are something Kremlin propaganda tries to keep quiet about. For example, last night drones attacked the Lysky railway station in the Voronezh region. As can be seen from eyewitness videos, a fire broke out at the site after the strike. The governor of the Voronezh region, though reluctantly, confirmed the drone attack a few hours after the incident, noting that, as a result of drone debris falling, a power line and the railway station were damaged and train traffic was delayed. This concerns the Lysky station, which is considered one of the largest railway hubs of the Southeastern Railway of the Russian Federation.
However, at present, the enemy has concentrated about 50,000 troops in the Sumy region. This was reported by Ivan Shevtsov, head of the press service of the Steel Border Brigade. He noted that the most tense situation is in the Kursk direction.
Steel Border is positioned in the northern Zaporizhzhia direction, mostly in the Sumy region. In the Sumy region, the situation is becoming quite tense, specifically in the Kursk direction, within the Petinska and Yunakivska territorial communities. It is precisely there that the enemy is amassing the largest number of personnel, about 50,000 troops. Currently, this is happening in that direction. And it is on this section that the enemy is constantly carrying out active assault operations. During the past day, we had 7 engagements, all of which were repelled, and the defense forces are doing everything possible and impossible to hold back the enemy in the Kursk direction. In another section of the Sumy region, the enemy is not acting actively, but continues to carry out constant actions. Shelling with artillery as well. As always, the enemy is actively using drones, both strike and reconnaissance types.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
In general, Syrsky also emphasized that despite all future guarantees in the negotiation process, we must constantly prepare for war. He assured that he believes in the wisdom and professionalism of Ukrainian diplomats. However, the continuation of this war or the possibility of Russia starting a new one cannot be ruled out. In no way.
Even in the event of a peace agreement or a frozen conflict, we must constantly work to improve the combat readiness of our army, take into account the experience of the war and the conclusions drawn from a thorough analysis, and build the most modern, most powerful force. A high-tech army. I think the enemy will be able to recover very quickly.
Putin is not so much trying to buy time as he is trying to seize territory, and for that he needs time. Yes, the commander-in-chief commented on the participation of the Russian dictator in the negotiations. They say that the expenditures of the Russian Federation are regularly increasing, and every kilometer costs the Russians more and more killed and wounded. But through their stubbornness, they are trying to achieve their set goals. Other experts and analysts are saying the same thing. All the details, watch right now.
Under the cover of a possible ceasefire, the Russian army is actively moving columns of armored vehicles, tanks, and manpower to the front. Judging by the published videos, the occupying equipment is moving toward the Zaporizhzhia and Donetsk regions. According to military experts, it is precisely there that massive assault actions by the Russians may take place in the near future.
At present, the level of implementation is far from the plans that were presented. thanks to the heroism of our defenders. But then there are pieces of territory, and there's a reason to say, well, let's exchange these pieces of territory. We will completely leave Sumy and Kharkiv regions, and you please hand over to us what we have written into our so-called constitution. Pieces of Donetsk, parts of Donetsk, half of Donetsk, about 30-40% that remains there, half of Kherson, and half of Zaporizhzhia region. This is the kind of conversation that could take place.
The Russian dictator is putting pressure on Ukraine. And on the diplomatic front, despite not having much success on the battlefield, Putin still hasn't given up hope of grabbing everything for himself. New pieces of Ukraine.
He wants to trade a pause in the war, in the killings, for the legalization of the occupation of our land. He wants to get territorial spoils for the second time. He was allowed to take Crimea, and that led to the occupation in Donetsk and Luhansk regions. He did not receive preventive punishment when he gathered a contingent on our borders. This led to a full-scale war and the occupation of even more parts of Ukraine. Now Putin wants to be forgiven for seizing the south of our Kherson region, Zaporizhzhia, the entire territory of Luhansk, Donetsk, and Crimea. This second attempt to divide Ukraine by Russia, we
won't allow it. I know that Russia is second and we are third. That's why we stand firmly on clear Ukrainian positions. If Putin doesn't want peace, he must be made to want it. That is exactly why Ukraine and Europe have presented their own plan to end the war. As the Wall Street Journal writes, the first stage of any settlement must be a ceasefire. The plan also states that any exchange of territories is only possible on a mutual basis. That is, if Ukraine withdraws its troops from some regions, Russia must withdraw its forces from others.
First, there must be an honest end to the war, and it depends precisely on Russia. It is Russia that must end the war it started. Second, Ukraine and all its partners, however, recognize the necessity of a ceasefire, an end to the killings. There is only one party opposing this. They protest. That is Putin. His only card to play is the ability to kill, and he is trying to sell the cessation of deaths at the highest possible price.
At the same time, as Western journalists claim, European officials insist that any territorial concessions from Ukraine must be backed by strong security guarantees, in particular with potential Ukrainian membership in NATO.
What is needed is not a pause in the killing, but a real, lasting peace. Not just a ceasefire, not sometime later, not after months, not eventually.
And while the truce has not yet come, the armed forces of Ukraine continue to use force to drive the occupiers from our land. Yes, according to the Institute for the Study of War, the armed forces of Ukraine are counterattacking and achieving success in the Kupiansk direction for the second day in a row. According to geolocated footage published online, the AFU have recently repelled enemy attacks and advanced to the southwest of Kondrashivka. At the same time, in the previous day's report, analysts stated that the Ukrainian side had also advanced to the southwest from Radkivka, which is north of Kupiansk. In addition, our defense forces have liberated and completely cleared the settlement of Besalivka in the Sumy region. According to the General Staff, the operation involved units of the 30th, the 23rd Separate Regiment, and the 24th Separate Assault Battalion. As a result of the operation, the enemy suffered significant losses. Meanwhile, the occupiers are close to semi-encircling the Pokrovsk-Mer-Nohrat agglomeration, military analysts report. In the Rodinske area, the enemy has advanced a solid 4 to 5 kilometers. The main fighting is currently taking place near the railway on the Dorozhno-Rodinska stretch.
Geographically, the military formation is not yet encircled, but the logistics are. Supply routes are practically cut off, and bringing anything in or taking anything out is no longer feasible. Well, it's becoming impossible.
The Russians also tried to break into Pokrovsk itself. Out of 150 occupiers, only about 30 made it to the city. But even they did not achieve any results. However, military experts do not rule out that the armed forces of Ukraine may be forced to leave the city if the occupiers' pressure does not ease. But for now, there are no prerequisites for this, and our defenders are bravely repelling the assaults of the enemy.
In the city and then retreating does not justify itself. over a year of fighting near Pokrovsk, quite a lot of enemy manpower and equipment has been destroyed, so to speak. One could say that Pokrovsk has already fulfilled its military mission several times over, so let's treat this calmly. In war, sometimes you have to retreat in order to move to other positions, where perhaps it will be easier to hold the defense. No gates are opening there, no open spaces where the Russians can make significant advances, nothing like that.
But even for the residents of the Russian Federation themselves, things are not going so well over there. Russians, like Ukrainians, are getting used to living under constant shelling. But unlike the Russian army, the Ukrainian armed forces strike exclusively at military targets, not at civilians, like Putin does.
And what do you think about Commander-in-Chief Syrsky's statements? We look forward to your comments. Stay tuned for more important updates and don't forget to like the video. Wishing you peaceful skies above.